Everyone. My name is Diane Havler, and I am Chief of the HIV/ID and Global Medicine Division, and also the Director of the AIDS Research Institute. And on behalf of Dr. Monica Gandhi, who leads Ward 86, as well as CFAR and Mallory Johnson, the Director of CAPS, we would like to welcome you to the 2025 World AIDS Day celebration. Today. Now, I know we're a little bit late, a couple of days late, but we thought very few people might come on Sunday. So here we are. I also would like to do a special welcome to some of our guests. Ooh, that looks very cool. Richard's coming down the aisle. Take a look at that. First, I want to welcome those people online, and a special welcome to Drs. Colette and Dr. Janice, who are visiting here from the search team from Kenya. Could you all stand up? Just very, very happy to have you here. Please note the fashionable winter coats that they are wearing. Okay, so what we're going to do today is on World AIDS Day, it's a moment for us to reflect and remember those that we've lost during the pandemic over the last 4 decades. But also a time to take stock of and really celebrate the progress that has been made. We are going to be facing many challenges, United States and globally, over the next couple of years in our AIDS response. We've been through tough times before. We're going to go through some tough times ahead, but what we have to do is remember this incredible community we have here. Every one of you here and online is making massive contributions to the AIDS response, and we really do appreciate that and want to acknowledge that in this year World AIDS Day. So in that line, one of the catalysts of progress in the AIDS response is research, of course, but it's also mentoring in research. And we need to keep our pipeline active with young investigators. And in that light, this year, the AIDS Research Institute received nominations for awards for the Research Mentor of the Year. And I'm very proud to announce that this year's winner is Dr. Carol Camlin. Applause. So maybe we can go to the next slide. I can do that. Okay, so I'm just going to say a few things about Dr. Camlin. She received her PhD in 2008 from the University of Michigan and did a TAPS postdoctoral fellowship in 2010. With that really outstanding training, she was able to secure a whole series of grants from the National Institutes of Health. I'm not going to tell you the acronyms, but just to say she has been highly successful in getting research funding. And the focus of her work is behavioral and social science research, and she really has been a pioneer here at UCSF in developing that particular domain of research. Carol really has dedicated her career to supporting the success of early scholars in HIV research. This has been recognized in other areas. The National Institute of Health awarded her a Mid-Career Investigator Award, which is really supporting her mentoring role. She has mentored domestic and international pre- and postdoctoral scholars, junior faculty on the conduct of research, qualitative research methodology, and concepts of gender, HIV, and human mobility. She is an avid mentor of research staff, guiding research assistants in her projects in Kenya and Uganda, and developing research presentations and first author manuscripts. Her support has led to significant accomplishments for her mentees, which include them getting grants, manuscripts in highly ranked journals, getting into graduate programs, and faculty positions. I would just say on a personal note, I've had the privilege in my career of working with Carol over the years in the search collaboration, and she is just really incredible. She has great scientific questions. She looks at problems in very creative ways. And in line with the award that she's receiving today, she's always thinking about, with this question we're going to address, who is someone that can help and I can bring along to work on this with me to further promote that career. And that takes a lot of extra time and commitment. And really, Carol, you are a person who does that. Carol, UCSF is very fortunate to have you on our faculty. And I just want to say that you are truly a beloved colleague and mentor. So with those opening remarks, we are going to have next on the program, Sarah. Sarah's going to come in, a mentee of Carol, to make some remarks. Thank you. Can I use this one?
Yes, of course.
All right, good morning. Let the love fest continue. So good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to celebrate Dr. Carol Camlin, this year's recipient of the ARI Award for Outstanding Research Mentorship. Dr. Camlin has been my mentor since 2019 when I joined the postdoctoral traineeship in AIDS prevention studies. As one of her mentees, I can say that I've benefited tremendously from her dedication to mentorship, her advocacy, her honest and constructive feedback, and her focus on developing the next generation of HIV researchers. Dr. Camlin has dedicated her career to supporting the success of early career scholars in HIV research. What is abundantly clear about Dr. Camlin is that she is devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and developing those who have been historically underrepresented in HIV research in both the US and Africa as the next generation of HIV researchers. Dr. Camlin has mentored domestic and international master's, doctoral, and postdoctoral scholars, as well as junior faculty and research team members. Her support has led to significant accomplishments for her mentees, including Fogarty Fellowships, NIH Career Development Awards, MPHs, PhDs, faculty positions, and scores of publications in high-impact journals. Carol also has all of the qualities that you look for in a mentor. She is attentive, thoughtful, empathetic. She provides focused feedback to strengthen our research, and she has encouraged her mentees when we have faced challenges and setbacks, both academic and personal. And she has pushed us towards opportunities that we never believed were within our reach. She has also offered many opportunities for collaboration, while also nudging us to make our own ways and pursue our research interests, which are complementary but independent of her own. She shows up with tangible support when you need her and celebrates your successes. She goes above and beyond for her mentees and has helped all of us to achieve career success. Carol, from all of your mentees, thank you. You are an exemplary mentor, and we are incredibly fortunate to work with you and to have benefited from your commitment and love of mentorship. We are so glad that you're receiving this well-deserved recognition. Thank you.
Fortunate to have Carol as one of my mentors ever since I started here at UCSF about 7 years ago. And I'm so grateful for all the stages of my career that she's helped me through, from coming here as a professional researcher to transitioning to an assistant professor, to being successful with my first KO1, and now to helping me get my first RO1, or working on that right now. I remember when I first met her, or one of the first times when Cynthia Harper suggested, well, Carol could be one of your mentors, especially in qualitative research methods. And I remember when I talked to her, she shared something to the effect of, you know, Allison, I really invest a lot of time in this. I really value mentoring. So I just wanted you to know it's something I care deeply about. And I've seen that in the way, just how thoughtful her comments, her feedback is to me. And just to exemplify that, when I was working on my K, I remember writing out my specific aims, and you know, some people give you a lot of red line edits, some people give you comments. And I just remember very specifically, Carol's basically took up the whole page in the Word document with her comment. And it had so many details, so many gems in it about, you know, what books I need to read to prepare myself to propose different qualitative methods, to learn about grounded theory as I write about it, as one of my training aims. So citing all these different resources, and then always bringing you back to the conceptual framework. She's always very keen on that. And I think just basically it was like a dissertation she was writing out for me, and I had to paste in another Word document, and just line by line, so much rich feedback. And I think that's really what she gives all of us, is such careful attention, and helps us think very deeply about things. And even recently in a paper I shared with her as a co-author, she reminded me, let's go back to the conceptual frameworks. Like, how does this relate to these different conceptual models? And I think that's what makes for a good mentor, is not just saying good job, but just helping to push you, helping you to learn even more and think deeply about things. And so I've really benefited and grown as a researcher over these last several years because of how thoughtful she's been with her comments, with her mentoring, and just really pushing me each time to think really deeply. So I really value that. And I know I'm one of several people who've really benefited from her mentorship. So I'm thrilled that you're receiving this award today. And I hope that everyone else that other mentees and other early stage researchers can have the benefit of such a great mentor like you, Carol. So thank you so much. And I'm so thrilled that you're being given this award. Thank you.
Oh, so Carol, on behalf of the ARI Inspire, which is the research community, would like to present you the ARI Award for Outstanding Research.
See, I am just is this one? Speaking through this. I just want to thank all of you. Thanks to the ARI and the entire HIV research community at UCSF for the honor of this award. I am truly, and all of my mentees, those that nominated me, I'm deeply humbled by this recognition of my mentorship. Just knowing that I'm so surrounded by so many gifted and talented colleagues here who all devote so much energy and time to mentorship. So to have this recognition just means an awful lot. And I think I'm shaking from all of these testimonies, honestly. I think my path towards mentorship did begin with an interest in ethics and taking an approach towards HIV research and our work in Africa, especially in a way that's not in any way extractive, but rather generative and creative, and not just kind of giving the people we work with a paycheck through our grants, but working together in a generative and creative way that like expands the circle of collaboration, the circle of inclusion in the work of producing scientific knowledge and expanding career opportunities and really building careers. So for me, this was really enabled by the structure and the ethos that Diane Habler set up through the work that she's done with the founding of the Search Collaboration and all the many studies on which I've worked with her, and the incredible teams that we have the honor of working with in Kenya and Uganda, and then my own studies in the region. And I've continued this, just making sure that those who are engaged in data collection have a hand in interpreting data and publishing. And this is an approach that I also share with all of my mentees. And the idea here is that we are developing new ways of working and building partnerships that is equitable and ethical. And that's really based in integrity of the research process and in terms of how we treat one another as human beings. So I've been really influenced by this notion of Hannah Arendt's that the revelation of the self happens in the public realm, that it's really by, being heard and having our actions witnessed by others that constitutes our full personhood. And it's sort of like we all need to be seen, right? And so, mentorship for me is, of course, about things like clarifying goals and, developing time management skills and hopefully practicing what I preach and not being a hypocrite about those things. But more than that, I think it's hopefully to be a wise and compassionate witness to another's path. And, everybody needs to have that witness and that guide. And I think that, with age, with aging and with experience, we get some perspective, and that's a good thing. It allows us to be able to give some perspective to our mentees that they may not have yet about really important moments. Like this is the moment where you're making your unique scientific contribution. This is where you are defining yourself professionally as a scholar, and to help kind of provide a view of that process, so that through that, through these choices you're making right now, you're establishing who you are professionally. And sometimes mentees are not even aware of all the choices that are available to them. So it's helping. Hopefully, this process is helping people to develop a sense of confidence and a sense of self-recognition that gets built over time. So for me, it's a part of building my own self-knowledge, and it's a part of also engendering growing self-knowledge in others, that this is really all about. So I found it incredibly fulfilling. It has become more and more important to me in my career here at UCSF. So I'm just tremendously grateful and very, very honored for this recognition. And thank you all so much. And now I think we have Waru's talk next. So I have the honor also of introducing Waru Gichane, who is assistant professor in the Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health, or ANSWER research program in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences. Her research is dedicated to identifying and addressing the structural and social factors that produce disparities in sexual and reproductive health outcomes in the United States, Eastern and Southern Africa. In her work, she uses a variety of participatory and applied qualitative methods to explore quality of sexual and reproductive health services, adolescent sexual behavior, and HIV prevention and treatment interventions. She currently holds a KO1 Career Development Award from NIMH, where she'll be conducting research to improve measurement and interventions focused on economic empowerment and HIV prevention for adolescent girls and young women in Kenya. She has a BS in Human Development from Cornell University and MSPH and PhD in Health Behavior from UNC Chapel Hill. And just on a personal note, I am so happy for you all to be introduced, many of you, to Dr. Gichane, who is an incredible addition to the UCSF HIV research community. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce her today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that introduction. I am so happy to be here today. I know I wasn't asked to provide additional remarks about Dr. Camlin, but I know a lot of her mentees have talked about their contributions to their professional development and growth and feedback on manuscripts. But I think something I'd like to really add to that is what she's provided on a personal level. I first met her when I was being recruited for this faculty position here at UCSF. And often in these meetings, you're expecting people to just sort of, okay, this is the kind of funding you should apply for. This is what we need to know about our department. But in our meeting, she gave so much of herself. And introduced me to opportunities at the university that I didn't know were possible. And I think specifically things that I needed to know, sort of as a person coming from a lower income background, as a Black woman in academic medicine. I think she really took the time to provide some nuance about what this experience and this position would really look like, and gave me opportunities to look for offer the support that I needed. And she's continued that on since I have transitioned into faculty. So I just want to say that it goes far beyond the professional feedback she's given. So thank you so much for being such a wonderful mentor and supporting me in this work. So today I'll be giving an overview of some of the work I've started in my K01. This was awarded last year. So I'll give a brief background about HIV, economic empowerment, and the work I'll be doing in my K. Then I'll be talking about my first study focused on advancing conceptualization of economic empowerment. My second study focused on measurement, and conclude with what this means for economic interventions. As you all may be familiar, in Eastern and Southern Africa, there are significant inequities in HIV acquisition by race, by gender and sex. Adolescent girls and young women are a population that experiences significant inequities. In the younger age groups, about 15 to 19 and the 18 to 24 age groups, we see that young women have often 3, 4, 5 times the risk of HIV acquisition compared to their same age peers. These are data from Kenya, which is the focus of my most recent work. And you'll see where we start seeing that gap in that earlier age group. The inequities that we see are driven by a multitude of different factors. Economic vulnerability is caused by structural inequities, including access and cost of services, national trends in gender equity, public policy and laws which criminalize things like sex work, drug use. On the community level, we see significant levels of stigma around talking about sexuality, safety in going to access HIV prevention and sexual and reproductive health services. We have gender norms that may exclude young women from educational opportunities, employment opportunities. We see on interpersonal level, we see violence within households, we see violence within intimate relationships. There's family dynamics that are present. Who is prioritized when seeking education, land inheritance, and others interpersonal family dynamics. There's differences in the social support received. And then on a personal level, we see other factors, including educational attainment, employment, access to HIV prevention information and services, as well as sexual behavior. Because of this multitude of sort of economic vulnerability and how it relates to HIV risk, we've seen that on an international level, that economic empowerment has been prioritized as a strategy for achieving gender equity, reducing HIV risk. So economic empowerment is part of UNA's strategy for reducing HIV incidence, but we also see it as one of the sustainable development goals. As Target 5 focuses undertaking reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to ownership and control over land and other forms of property, financial services, inheritances, natural resources in accordance with national laws. We see that economic empowerment interventions have been part of the HIV response. So they've often been implemented as part of combination HIV prevention approaches. one of the most prominent of which is the DREAMS intervention, which has been implemented in 10 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, where we see economic empowerment in the form of cash transfers bundled with other services focused on violence prevention, education, rollout of PrEP, rollout of other HIV services. There's also been examples in other countries. There's the Ujana Salama program in Tanzania, which also provides a family cash transfer program. As the government cash transfer program bundled with other adolescent-specific services. We have HIV Prevention Trials Network 068, which was an intervention which provided cash transfers and educational support for young women in the context of an HIV prevention trial, and the Adolescent Girls Initiative in Kenya, another program which bundled cash transfers with other programs. It's with, I've been sort of in this focus on economic empowerment in HIV for about the last 8 years. It was a focus of my dissertation and some of my postdoctoral work. And it's through this, I worked on one of the evaluations of the DREAMS program in Tanzania, understanding how young women use the cash transfers, how they changed their lives, and how that linked to their HIV prevention. And it was from that work that I was really inspired to understand sort of how are these programs working? What's needed to make them sustainable? What's needed to make them most effective? So in reviewing this work, I noticed a few critical gaps in our work on research on economic empowerment and HIV prevention. The first is how we conceptualized economic empowerment. Much of what we know about economic empowerment comes from some of the international development literature. And some of the theories and frameworks we use of these are very focused on the experiences of adult women. When we see this, some of the challenges that experience younger women, especially those still living in their family households, there are some nuances in terms of what they need to be empowered compared to what we see for older women. There's challenges in how we measure economic empowerment. When I looked through all of these different trials, we found that a lot of what they were looking for to measure like what is success was focused on resources, like were assets accumulated, maybe something about do they have a bank account? And I always ask myself, are these the things that are most important to young women? Has this made them feel like they're empowered? There are also measures of decision-making, and you can imagine in different family situations, decisions may be very limited. And so what is the scope of decisions that young women are able to make? And so often these are not very adolescent friendly and adolescent specific. And interventions, a lot of the economic empowerment programs have primarily focused on the individual level versus the family system. So it's from this work that I developed my KON aims with the support of my primary mentor, Dr. Camlin. My study is now titled Inua, which means uplift in Swahili, slightly different spelling. The first aim is focused on characterizing economic empowerment among adolescent girls and young women. The second is to develop and validate an economic empowerment scale. And the third is to adapt and pilot test a cash transfer intervention and measure feasibility, acceptability, and preliminary impact on economic empowerment and HIV risk behaviors. One thing I just want to note is, I was very nervous about submitting a very social science heavy proposal to NIMH for a KO1. And Dr. Camlin was very keen on giving me sort of the feedback I needed to feel confident in making this submission and in completing this work. So I just want to note for other social scientists who are here today that it is possible to have such awards and or it is possible to propose such research to the National Institutes of Health. So I just wanted to put that in here. So my study is set in Kenya, which has, and in the western part of the country in Kisumu, which has the second highest HIV prevalence. And there's also been a sustained HIV response with the DREAMS program focused on adolescents. I was also born in Kenya, and it was really important for me to be able to start doing work in regions close to home. And so this was a really important opportunity for me. So in my first aim of the K, I was focused on advancing conceptualization of economic empowerment. I did so by conducting focus groups, 5 focus groups with adolescent girls and young women ages 15 to 24 earlier this year. The criteria were they had to be able to read or write English or Kiswahili and enrolled in an economic empowerment intervention. I wanted people who had economic empowerment sort of on their mind to ask them questions about sort of what it meant to feel empowered. We conducted our recruitment approach. We began with 2 focus groups, one with younger adolescents, one with older adolescents, and we used a theoretical sampling approach where we started additional participants were recruited based on key characteristics, emerging categories. And I used a constructivist grounded theory approach to data analysis. We had split participants between the 15 to 19 and 24 age group. Most participants had some secondary education or higher, and 11 were currently employed. And so this is the economic empowerment framework that emerged from my work. So participants talked about sort of with 3 stages of economic empowerment. The first was sort of the pre-empowerment, which were the conditions of vulnerability that they experienced. The second was the stage of transformation through provision of knowledge, skills, resources. And the third was achieving individual, social, and financial power. So participants described the preconditions of empowerment as individual experiences a state of economic and social hardship. Such examples included unwanted pregnancies, dropping out of school, general poverty within the household, or an early diagnosis of HIV. The most common hardship was that of unwanted pregnancy, and the circumstances in which they became pregnant and carried their pregnancies were often difficult. In nearly all cases, adolescent girls who were pregnant did not get much support, and carrying a pregnancy often led young women to drop out of school. Although Kenyan national policies prohibit schools from excluding pregnant students, often families would withdraw support. Here are some quotes from 2 focus groups participants. The first says, "This friend of mine got pregnant when she was in class 8, and because of stigma in school, stigma in society, she ended up dropping out of school." Another participant said, "So like me, the time I became pregnant, I was in Form 3, which is about the equivalent of grade 11. So when I became pregnant, to be honest, the man who impregnated me did not deny, but it's like he lied to me. So my father was giving me pressure, even going back to school, he refused. He spoke rudely to me, as in he stressed me so bad." So here you can see sort of the coupled of stigma, school dropout, and withdrawal of support. And then we get to this phase of what we describe as this transformation. And so economic empowerment was viewed as a transformational process where vulnerable young women attain knowledge in the form of financial wealth, financial, health, and social knowledge, skills which may result in employment or starting a business, and resources in the form of tuition to return to school or capital to start a business. All participants who were in my study had participated in some kind of economic empowerment program. That was one of the criteria. And so this included things like cash transfer programs, programs which provided school fees and training, and employment and internship opportunities. And so here a participant says, "I think economic empowerment is empowering a person financially by providing him or her with a job, some training or education, so the person can be independent." We also see a participant talking about sort of more the transformational process. And so this participant says, "Somebody has come from dark to light, meaning this person has been struggling, he or she has been a sufferer, but the outcome she has now, he or she has found the solution to all the problems he or she was facing for everything. Sort of this endpoint of empowerment where we're talked about achieving individual, social, and financial power. Examples of being empowered included feeling confident, being viewed highly in the community, living independently, being able to provide for themselves and their families, and freedom from financial dependence on partners. This participant shares, I got a job somewhere and got employed, and I felt like I was empowered because I can make some money on my own. I have an idea that I can make a burner and place it somewhere. I can do something for customers to get income. I can depend on myself. This other person talks more about, another participant talks about sort of the social or individual power she's gained. And she says, I was the kind of a person I could not associate with other people. I could not, like in a forum like this, I could not talk at all. But now I have the confidence. I can talk, I can advise, I can counsel my peers. This economic empowerment program has really supported me. And so here you see, like, not only has what she's gained for herself, but how she feels like she can now contribute to her community in a way that she wasn't able to before. So just in conclusion, economic empowerment was described as a transformational process of shifting from vulnerability to individual, social, and financial power. And when you look in the economic empowerment theory literature, you see, I feel like this really resonated by the definition of empowerment by Ben Cleason and Miller, where they talk about it as a process whereby women and girls are transformed from a situation where they are limited power and access to assets to a situation where they experience economic advancement and their power and agency is enhanced. And so I feel like my work really talked about expanding what power and agency meant for young women. So now I'll talk a little bit about the next phase of my work is measure development. And so I talk, some of the work I've conducted is focused on this is the process of measure development by Boateng et al. And you'll see the first phase is item development, which is focused on focus groups, feedback from mentors, review of economic empowerment measures, and a systematic scoping review. In the second phase, I'll be conducting cognitive interviews and a survey with participants and psychometric evaluation. And the third phase will be looking at things like dimensionality, reliability, and validity. I'll go quickly through some of my work, but the first stage was item generation. And this is a picture actually from Dr. Camlin and I, where I came up with all these different items based on focus groups, and we went through a process of thematically coding all the different items. These items were then coded into categories, and so these included 10 categories, which included education and in the education and training part, we talked about the categories were gaining knowledge, skills, capacity to earn money. Under basic needs, we came up with the categories of being given financial help, experiencing improvement in financial situations. Under empowerment, the categories of items were focused on feeling knowledgeable, confident, feeling control, self-reliance and autonomy, and coping skills, as well as gaining social power. Under financial power, the categories we came with becoming hardworking or not idle, responsible in supporting self and independence, as well as attaining goals. These were some of the items that I first started with statements of this came directly from adolescents, is how they described being empowered. So they said things like, I have skills that can help me gain money. I'm now capable of paying my own bills. And then I was able to translate those into questions and then translate them into Swahili. The next phase of my work will be conducting cognitive interviews and surveys with participants. And that will be happening in the new year. And just to conclude, based on this body of work, some of the implications for economic empowerment interventions is that measuring changes in resources or assets may overlook dimensions of economic empowerment that are most important to adolescent girls and young women, especially when we talk about those gains in social and individual power. And economic empowerment interventions should address these additional dimensions of individual and social power, and that pregnant and parenting adolescent girls and young women may be especially vulnerable and may need specialized interventions. To conclude, I'd just like to thank my amazing KO1 mentors, Dr. Camlin, Dr. Agat, Dr. Lightfoot, Dr. Nealons, Dr. Pade, and Dr. Sawamala, funding from NIMH, and as well as my INUA research team. I would be remiss to thank the late Dr. Kawango Agat, who is one of my K mentors who passed away earlier this year, but she was an amazing light and force in this work and a great inspiration. And so I just want to thank her for her guidance through this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Waru, for that wonderful presentation and that ambitious research that you're in the midst of. I think we have time for one question to, if we can narrow it down to one question, or someone online or anyone in the room. Yes, Gabe. Gabe beat you to it, Monica. Oh, microphone.
I know your background is like dreams, and I'm just curious what the work you've been doing is all this work of understanding empowerment. How you reflect on perhaps the impact of dreams, and in particular, it seems like some research not necessarily showing a clear impact of dreams on HIV incidence by my view from what I've been seeing. So just curious your take on how this fits into that conversation. Thanks.
Yes, I really appreciate that. I think as a PhD student, I remember just, okay, please show me the results of dreams. Like they've put everything into it. We've talked about this being sort of the big beacon of what was really going to impact HIV incidence for young people. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that. A lot of what I learned as a PhD student was sort of on how it was implemented. Like we gave cash transfers to young women, but some of my work found that sometimes their parents took some of the money, or they had other big life stressors that were occurring. And so in terms of, and they were also given entrepreneurial support while they were enrolled in Dreams, but unfortunately, the businesses that they were coming up with, they had too much competition. You'd have, 10 new like fruit and vegetable salespeople in a community where that already had that as a resource. So I think in terms of, what I'm learning is needing a little bit more specialized attention on like in sort of how we're looking at these interventions. I think interventions that impact sort of the family system. So, to make sure that the parents aren't asking their children for that money, or what kind of additional supports do the parents need, do partners need to ensure that young women have everything they need to for those resources to really have an impact. I'd also say I really wish they'd measured some of these other impacts. I think how they change individual, social, and some of those other impacts, because I think, we're not going to see HIV incident. I think it'll be a while before we see some of those bigger impacts. And I think these other ones are really important and maybe more important to young women than we might see HIV reduction. So.
All right, thank you for that. And I know there are other questions in the room and online, so please reach out, either corner her after the session or reach out by email or otherwise. I'm assuming that's great. Thank you again.
Thank you.
My last talk today is by Dr. Ayesha Appa. I'm really honored to introduce my mentee, but she really is a specialist both in addiction medicine and infectious disease, has done is dually boarded, but also did 2 fellowships in the area, and just was recently awarded a DP2 grant, which I think has been called a genius grant sometimes, from NIDA. And so we're very excited to feature her work, and her talk is entitled HIV Addiction Overdose, Running Towards this Endemic Fire in 2025.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gandhi. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted that our leadership wanted to highlight addiction alongside HIV on this momentous World AIDS Day, and really honored to be a part of this phenomenal program behind Dr. Gichane and Dr. Camlin. When thinking about the degree of the size and scope of this topic, and how I could do it justice in 15 minutes or in maybe 11 minutes, I will try. I really just came back to what World AIDS Day is about. It's about remembrance, as Dr. Havler mentioned. So, we'll take the next few minutes to remember the central and sometimes silent role people who injected drugs played early in the pandemic. It's about commemoration. So we will spend some time discussing and celebrating how the key features of the HIV response could be deployed in overdose prevention. And finally, always end with a call to action, and end by reviewing where we should be really 43 years into this entwined public health crisis of HIV addiction and overdose. Sorry here. And really a few key thoughts on how we can get there. So without further ado, I'll dive in here. We'll begin at the beginning. And I know that all of you in this room are familiar with June of 1981 and how in the months and years following the publication and dissemination of the first reports of cases of AIDS among men who had sex with men, how the medical community, the LGBT community was sort of lit afire. And I think as we tell those stories of those first known cases of AIDS in men who have sex with men, it's also important to think about, where people who inject drugs fit into that narrative, and the stories of those early individuals living and dying with HIV. I was really inspired by this book that I pictured here on the left, and that's written by Maya Salovitz, called Undoing Drugs. If you haven't picked it up before, I highly recommend it. Dr. Paula Lum gave it to me when I finished Addiction Medicine Fellowship, and it really, really affected me. And she, through the lens of somebody with lived experience, as somebody who is injecting heroin in New York City in the 80s, and feeling the fear and the grief of seeing her close friends go through HIV testing and diagnoses and death from the perspective of people who inject drugs, is able to sort of share a very personal perspective, while also really a really parsimonious, beautiful, meticulous account of history. And one thing that sort of a particular piece of the narrative that I'll highlight is that, again, while at least I used to think of my clock starting in 1981, and certainly there were cases that were circulating HIV beforehand, she shares that, in sort of retrospective review, we know that in 1977, there were 3 infants with HIV born to mothers who injected drugs in New York. And a few years later, in 81, there was a pediatrician in the Bronx who was trying to publish a case series about this new immune disorder among these babies born to mothers who injected drugs, and was ultimately sort of repeatedly unsuccessful. And just a few years later, we know that the seroprevalence of HIV in people who injected drugs in New York was a 50% or more. So this was incredibly significant among this community of people who inject drugs. And I think similarly, another sort of nugget of history here is is this piece in New York Magazine from 1987. One of the physicians, as I won't read the whole quote here, but says, "We used to call it Rikers Island adenopathy when we started seeing it in 1979 and 1980. Enlarged lymph nodes in drug addicts," sorry for the stigmatizing words, who'd been imprisoned at Rikers Island. Then it got identified and named AIDS. So I think, again, a number of these stories and expanding prevalence of HIV in people who inject drugs. And I want to anchor us in the political context of the time. You might think, oh my goodness, 50% of people who inject drugs living with HIV. If you think about or caring for people living with HIV in your practice now and how much work it takes to really and sort of work against a system to provide excellent high quality HIV care and substance use disorder care to folks that may not fit into our traditional system. What was it like for people in the 80s? And I think what was going on then was politically was the war on drugs. You know, in the 80s, there were multiple bills that had broad bipartisan support and were also incredibly racist, that were passed about mandatory minimums for crack possession. People with substance use disorder, quote, you know, chose their lifestyle. And addiction was a criminal problem. It was barely a medical problem. And I think that's something we are still fighting our way back from. I think one of the most momentous and sort of beautiful parts of this time in history was that, you know, that said, the activism from people who use drugs and in partnership with public health ultimately led to this concept of, or the birth of harm reduction that really reverberates through the country internationally to this day. It was this really simple idea that people had, that people who injected drugs deserved to live, that they could still use their drugs, and that did not have to be a death sentence. And so Bleach Man was born in 1988. This was a campaign that the SF AIDS Foundation used with, it's 1988 graphic beauty here, and really was the first superhero for people who inject drugs, which is, you know, phenomenal. And I think that, you know, looking back on this, what people who inject drugs with HIV really deserved at this time was not only this incredible grassroots movement of harm reduction, but also integrated treatment options for addiction as well as HIV. And this was not something that was available. I'd say, like, my last moment of history that I'll leave you with was that, you know, alongside the war on drugs there on the left, addiction medicine was not a board sort of certifiable specialty at this time. There were a number of people in this room and beyond doing this work, but addiction psychiatry became a fellowship in 1993. Addiction medicine became board certifiable in 2009. So again, there's a lot that has driven where we are today. But I think, you know, what I want to leave us with is that this legacy of harm reduction is a bedrock concept, as you all know, for the world, for HIV, for overdose prevention, and many other conditions, as we've seen in the last number of years. So as we, you know, sort of expand into thinking about overdose deaths, I want to take us into where are we now, and I'll say that with the expansion of opioid use in the 2000s, and then the replacement of those with high potency synthetic opioids or fentanyl, overdose deaths, as you know, have climbed to an all-time high. In 2023, last year, we saw the greatest number of overdose deaths in San Francisco history. 810 people died. This year, we're actually seeing a bit of a reduction that we can talk about after the session, but numbers are well above pre-pandemic levels, and we've seen over 1 million overdose deaths since 1999 nationally. What does this mean for people living with HIV? Well, in other jurisdictions like Vancouver, investigators have identified that this addiction and overdose crisis have led to meaningful reductions in life expectancy for people living with HIV after the obvious gains that we've seen in the past 20, 30 years related to ART effectiveness. And in San Francisco, where we had, for a time, the second highest county overdose death rate per capita, our community of people living with HIV is feeling this too. As you can see here in the slide, in the phenomenal San Francisco EPI report that compiles our HIV data, 1 in 5 deaths among people living with HIV between 2019 and 2022 were due to overdose. And in the tiny print there, this sort of expands depending on a few demographic characteristics. So 1/3 of deaths among people living with HIV who are cis women were due to overdose, and 43% of deaths among trans women living with HIV were due to overdose. These are small numbers, but the proportion is really dramatic, and the absolute numbers doubled when compared to a time period 5 to 10 years ago. So what do we do? One thing that I want to make sure that I leave you with is knowledge that overdose deaths are not all alike. So this is a figure from the SFDPH Center for Substance Use and Health, from Dr. Coffin's team, that shows you here the different colors essentially represent overdose deaths due to different substances or pairings of substances. So what I will just summarize for you is that the orange, the gray, the yellow are opioid and stimulant overdose deaths. So those are the people that have died with both of those things in their system, a combination of cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl primarily. And the blue there are people who have died with opioids alone in their system. So the majority of the deaths that we're seeing are stimulant and opioid overdose deaths. The mechanism of death is primarily opioid overdose or respiratory depression, but how we're getting there varies. And I think that's really important for us to consider when considering how do we prevent overdose death in people living with HIV. So I know I'm going to go a few minutes over here, but I'll go as quickly as I can. There are basically 3 ways that we can think about how these deaths are happening. There are folks who are using both stimulants and opioids intentionally. So they have opioid use disorder and stimulant use disorder, maybe both a part of their life. And then the second archetype is someone who's primarily has opioid use disorder. Maybe they intermittently use methamphetamine or accidentally exposed to it. And then the third is someone who primarily has stimulant use disorder, is primarily using methamphetamine or cocaine, and has unintentional opioid exposure. And I've sort of blue and yellowed that figure on the right for a reason. In the first 2 categories, we know methadone and buprenorphine are phenomenally effective for opioid use disorder, for overdose death prevention. Some of the best numbers needed to treat we have in medicine. So that is a strategy that nationally, citywide, everyone is trying to deploy as best we can. In the third category, I would argue that unintentional exposure, death due to unintentional exposure, should be a never event. And one question everybody has is, how often is this actually happening? Well, I think that what we're learning is that it may be more common than we think. In a 2022 sample of EMS-attended non-fatal opioid overdose events, the individuals who had the opioid overdose reported that essentially in 31% of those cases, they were trying to use their stimulant, not an opioid. And an additional 12% were also not trying to use opioids, but another drug. And then, as you can see, there more than half were trying to use fentanyl intentionally. But that is a large number of unintentional overdoses due to fentanyl. And even if that is an overestimation, I think it's an important number. You can see there, I was going to make you guess which is fentanyl and which is methamphetamine down here, but I think it's essentially indistinguishable. There are a number of mechanisms by which this might be happening that we can talk about another time. But I think that, to bring it home to our community living with HIV, is this happening in people living with HIV? I think our early data is yes. I think that There are a few different sources of these data. In the large CNIX cohort of people living with HIV, there was a really nice study that demonstrating that 15% of those individuals were reporting methamphetamine use and 3% report opioid use, which is really consistent with, I'd say, national numbers. Methamphetamine and alcohol tend to be more commonly used substances among people living with HIV as compared to opioid use. And then in data that we recently generated in partnership with Dr. Gandhi, with Matt Spinelli and the UCSF Hair Analytical Laboratory and UCLA, we looked at hair samples collected in 2019 through 2023 and found that fentanyl was detected in 22% of these hair samples in individuals reporting only methamphetamine use, no opioid use, and with urine testing negative for opioid use. So I think this is happening, and I'll say that, you know, moving to our commemoration pillar, I think a lot of my work is how do we leverage this incredible work that the HIV community has done in responding to this pandemic. And I think the EHE pillars will be familiar to many or most of you in diagnose, treat, prevent, and respond. And I want you all to think about, you know, the world before HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis as a biomedical prevention strategy. So, you know, if we take sexual acquisition of HIV and imagine we only had behavioral tools like risk reduction or condom use, and we didn't have something that allowed a user to have protection sort of every day of the year if they'd like, and not rely on sort of individual behavioral change, it would be a very different world. And that's what we're missing with overdose prevention. We don't have a biomedical prevention tool at the moment. And so I think what Monica alluded to, the trial that we will begin early in January 2025 is entitled the NOD study, naltrexone for overdose, and is really asking, can we use a long-acting injectable opioid antagonist for opioid overdose death prevention in people living with HIV or at risk who use stimulants. And so, you know, more to come there. And again, this sort of only addresses that third category of mixed stimulant fentanyl or stimulant opioid overdoses. So it has to be a solution, I think, as part of a larger number of strategies deployed by public health entities, but that is where we're going. I'll close by, you know, sharing our call to action. As I mentioned, you know, we are 43 years into this entwined public health crisis, and stimulant use, alcohol use, and opioid use are all relatively prevalent among people living with HIV, particularly the former two, as I mentioned. And acknowledging that many people in this room and on Zoom have worked on and are working on solutions, we really have limited examples of sort of broadly disseminated, effective integrated care outside of really some opioid use disorder models that provide that really acknowledge the challenges that people who use drugs face in accessing standard care. So, you know, this is just an example, I think, of one way as we move forward to conceive of truly integrated and paired HIV care alongside substance use disorder care. This little house built here is for stimulant use, but I think that there, you know, this sort of infinitely adaptable. But I think, you know, what we need to do is conceive of or integrate evidence-based substance use disorder treatment into HIV care under the same roof. And so for stimulant use disorder, that's contingency management and select medications, while we also are removing barriers to ART adherence, thinking really critically about how we best start and maintain and support people on long-acting ART and where and how we do that, how we can incentivize both long-acting or oral ART adherence, and really achieve both viral suppression depression and health for people living with HIV and substance use disorders. The last real slide I have for you is that, one, in just looking at that first pillar, some of you are familiar with the combo study is a trial that is part of my K that we're just completing, and we'll share that when we integrated contingency management, which is first line treatment for stimulant use disorder, into Ward 86, into HIV primary care, and provided incentives for both oral to ART adherence using a point of care tenofovir assay and reductions in stimulant use via a point of care test using the same urine sample, we saw that our viral suppression went from 55% before the program to 92% following in people that attended at least a visit. So this was really exciting and something that, again, this is just a tip of this iceberg here of sort of how to integrate both HIV care and stimulant use disorder treatment together. There are many unanswered questions here that I'm not even going to go into, but we'll just close again by thank you all for staying a few minutes late, and I'll leave this summary up here and acknowledge my mentors, Dr. Gandhi, Dr. Cuffin, and many others that contributed. Thank you so much.